Welcome to the Wild Crone Wisdom podcast with your host Vinutha Mohan. In this episode, we explore our brain's inbuilt negativity bias, which makes it constantly interpret and categorize every moment. Is there a way to step out of this incessantly judging mind and quieten the voice within? The snow falls, each flake in its appropriate space. A Zen saying. There once lived a wise man in a village. He had a young, noble, and accomplished son. One day, his son won a handsome, high priced Arabian horse in a competition. All the villagers cheered for him and asked the father, "Isn't this the best thing that happened?" The father replied, "Maybe." A few days later, the son, while riding his new Arabian horse, had an accident and was badly injured. While he lay in the hospital with many broken bones, the villagers lamented to the father, "Isn't this accident so terrible?" The father replied, "Maybe." A few days later, the king's army marched into the village and rounded up all the young men to force them to join the army. They left the wise man's son alone because he was not able bodied. The villagers lamented over losing their young sons to war and cried to the wise man, "Aren't you lucky that your son's accident saved him?" The wise man replied, "Maybe." This story illustrates the stance of non-judgment. Our brain, unfortunately, has a negativity bias built in. When it comes online, it is given two initiatives: avoid threats, approach carrots, meaning don't get killed, and if you survive, then look for food and rewards. So if you are the brain, you can see that it is more important to avoid sticks than to approach carrots. One day you don't check behind the bush for that saber-toothed tiger, maybe your last day on earth. So naturally, our brains are a Teflon for positive events and a Velcro for negative events, says neuropsychologist Rick Hanson. All day long, our brains are doing threat assessment, constantly categorizing people, events, objects as good, bad, or neutral. When we live exclusively from such a reptilian strategy, life can feel exhausting and very unfulfilling because overthinking your way through life fragments reality. When you have lived long enough, you would have experienced both pleasurable and painful events. Research shows that for most people, the ratio between pleasure and pain is about 50-50. When you're constantly categorizing and fragmenting life, then we experience what Brene Brown brilliantly calls foreboding joy. Foreboding joy involves, on one hand, constantly rehearsing tragedy, and on the other hand, dealing with perpetual disappointment. Nothing is ever quite up to the mark. For most of us, this leads to a constant background hum of a very low grade dissatisfaction that never allows us to fully be in alignment with life, with what is. Brene warns us, don't squander away joy. So, is there another way to perceive life? How would it be to step back and view your life's experience from a slightly higher vantage point? How would it be to practice trust versus control of life? What if, for a second, you didn't get so caught up in the content of your life and looked at it from context? Is it possible that in the midst of chaos and seemingly random events, perhaps there is a higher order? Neither good nor bad, but only the highest good. Is it possible to have faith and trust in life, in the universe, in oneself, in a higher power, and look at life in totality rather than fragmented bits? Eckhart Tolle explains it beautifully through the metaphor of a virgin forest versus a well manicured garden. A virgin forest at first glance appears chaotic: rotting trees, fallen leaves, new young shoots growing from rotting trees, insects and bugs crawling, symbiotic relationships between mature trees and creepers. To the categorizing left brain, it seems to make no sense at first. The thinking mind goes crazy. However, when we allow our mind to settle and sit quietly on the forest floor, connect to the inner stillness, then we start to experience the sacredness of the forest, the hidden harmony in the seeming chaos, a higher intelligence that has impeccably designed every twig, grass, and insect to be in the absolute perfect place, in perfect order, and eventually we too become part of the forest, melding in with the rest. Such raw, primal experience of the sacred can never be found in a well manicured garden. The mind, for sure, can easily find its way around because of the external order. However, it leaves you feeling a bit empty, longing for something unfulfilled, perpetual disappointment. All judgments are self judgments. When Jesus said, treat your neighbor like you treat yourself, I guess he assumed that you treat yourself with love. However, if you constantly breathe shame infused fumes of low self worth, harsh self judgment, and constant self flagellation, you're also going to treat others in the same way. Brene wants us to not judge people by their worst behavior. All judgments are labels, and all labels are prison sentences without the chance of parole. The only way out of this is to practice self compassion and self love. The more you can accept yourself with all of your imperfections, the more you can allow yourself to be who you are moment to moment without a script for yourself, the more you will have a generous view of others. Everything in life is an inside out job. So, how can we put all this into practice? Brene gives a simple yet profound formula for this. She calls it living big. Big, B-I-G, is an acronym. B stands for boundaries, knowing what you like and what you don't like, and communicating that clearly and consistently to self and others. I stands for integrity, choosing courage over comfort, what is right over what is fun, fast, and easy, choosing to practice our values rather than just professing them. G stands for generosity. What is the most generous assumption I can make about a person's intentions or what this person said? Without integrity and boundaries, it is impossible to practice generosity. When we take good care of ourselves and treat ourselves kindly and live with integrity, then and only then can we practice generosity and non judgment. Brene summarizes this very beautifully. She says, living big is saying, yes, I am going to be generous in my assumptions and intentions while standing solidly in my integrity and being very clear about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Non attachment, non resistance, and non judgment are therefore three practices that bring you in alignment with life and with conscious, enlightened living. Namaste.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wild Crone Wisdom with your host, Vinutha Mohan. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist from the Bay Area, California, specializing in trauma and attachment repair. I'm also a certified EMDR specialist and a certified shamanic practitioner. In this podcast series, we delve into the journey of our spiritual essence having a human experience. While many social scientists study human emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, and others explore transcendental experiences, few bridge the gap to help embody the spiritual wisdom in everyday life. I call this the psycho-spiritual path. Through this podcast, I hope to share bite-sized practical insights for navigating life as an empowered sovereign being. If you found this episode valuable, we'd greatly appreciate your support. Please consider rating, reviewing, commenting, and subscribing on your podcast platform to help us reach a wider audience. You can explore more of my writings on Medium by following the link in the show notes. We'd also love to hear about your experience, so feel free to share your thoughts with us at Wild Crone Wisdom Podcast at gmail.com. Thank you for being part of our journey. Please be advised, the information provided in the Wild Crone Wisdom podcast is intended for general information purposes only. Vinutha Mohan is a licensed therapist and healer. However, the content shared in this podcast does not replace or constitute professional advice, therapy, or counseling. It is essential to consult with a qualified mental health professional for personalized guidance regarding your unique circumstances. Thank you.